Good evening and welcome to the information session from Indigenous Services Canada on the second generation cutoff in Section 10 voting thresholds. So welcome. But before we get started, I want to go around so the counselors can introduce themselves to you. Okay? Yep. Go ahead, Amos. Can you?
Audrey Paulus Bobbery, welcome.
Dale Womberry.
Hi, Hazel Johnson.
Hi, thank you for coming, Elena Venevri.
Good evening. You braved the snow. Welcome, Cynthia Jameson.
So before you get started and before you introduce yourself, I just want to say this isn't consultation. It's an information session for our community. Okay? So introduce yourselves and the floor is yours, and we'll take questions after you're done your presentation. Okay?
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for having us as guests on your land. We are honored to be here, even in the snowstorm. My name's Alexa Hajar. I'm a senior policy analyst and portfolio manager at Indigenous Services Canada. So I manage the team that does the Bill S2 work and the collaborative process work on the second generation cutoff and Section 10 voting thresholds, which we're here to speak to you about today.
Just hang on a second.
Sorry. Hello. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much for having us here tonight. My name is Paula Suter. I'm an operational policy officer with Indigenous Services Canada. I began with the department when Bill C3 passed in just before 2011, so I have some registration experience, and I'm really happy to be here to join in these discussions and be on your lands this evening. Thank you so much. Awesome. So we'll get started with going through the presentation, and then happy to open the floor to some questions and answers at the end. So we'll get started. So just before we get into the content of the presentation, I just want to take a moment to recognize that conversations around the Indian Act can be very sensitive and upsetting to some. So I just wanted to mention that you're number one, take care of yourself and use supports if you need them. Or you can, stop me from talking. We can always deliver the information in another way. So what we'll be going over today will be a little bit about Bill S2, which is currently in the parliamentary process now, an act to amend the Indian Act, new registration entitlements. And then we'll speak about the ongoing collaborative process on the second generation cutoff and Section 10 voting thresholds. First, I'll speak about Bill S2. As I mentioned, it's in the parliamentary process now. It was introduced in May of this year. It represents the same amendments, or it was introduced with the same amendments as the former Bill C-38. The amendments in this bill were introduced with the amendments proposed here. So the first is related to the enfranchisement related provisions of the Indian Act. So Bill S2 proposes to repeal these provisions and replace them. It also proposes to provide a legal mechanism for individuals to deregister voluntarily if they wish. Right now, there's no authority for the registrar to remove individuals who are entitled and are on the register. So this will allow them to make that choice. It also supports natal band reaffiliation. So women who married First Nations men from another First Nation prior to 1985 were automatically transferred into those First Nations, and they essentially lost membership in their natal nations. So this will support those women and their descendants to reaffiliate. It also proposes to remove some outdated and offensive language in relation to dependent persons. The enfranchisement-related provisions are expected to impact approximately 3,500 individuals over the next 5 years. So here's an image about the kind of depicts the legislative process of Bill S2 and its progress. So the first reading was May 29th, as I mentioned. Second reading and debate began on June 25th, 2025, and it went to the Senate committee and was considered, and that phase began September 24th, 2025. So in November, the Standing Senate Committee proposed a number of amendments after hearing from numerous witnesses, including a remedy to the second generation cutoff. I went a little bit ahead of myself. So these are the amendments that they proposed and adopted. So to address this second generation cutoff, so essentially introducing a single parent rule, repealing section 6.2, and allowing entitlement to status to pass on indefinitely to future generations. This amendment was also introduced with or proposed with a 12-month delay of coming into force. So the amendments related to enfranchisement, should Bill S2 pass, would come into effect right away, but this particular amendment would have a 12-month delay. It also was amended in relation to the no liability clause. So the no liability clauses were removed from Bill S2 as well. So a bit about the next steps for Bill S2. It has to complete its journey in the Senate. So it's currently in the report stage. It will go to third reading, and then it will be referred to the House of Commons. So essentially, it will have similar steps in the House of Commons. It will go through first reading, second reading, third reading, consideration in the committee, and then depending on what happens, if there are amendments that are added or removed, it may need to go back to the Senate. But essentially, once the House of Commons and the Senate agree on a version of the bill, it's given royal assent, and then it becomes law. And Alexa will speak about the collaborative process.
Thanks, Paula. So we just wanted to cover Bill S2 a little bit because we know there's a lot of traction, a lot of movement on it, and the recent amendments from the Senate adding a solution to the second generation cutoff, that was not initially how the bill was proposed. We launched a collaborative process separately in November of 2023 to address the second generation cutoff. And really the intention of this process was to find a solution to the second generation cutoff. The question was just, how do we do it? So that was launched in November of 2023. And the reason why we're continuing on with this collaborative process in light of the Senate's amendments is it's possible that things change in the Senate, or when it moves to the House, amendments can be added or removed or changed. So we're still continuing forward with our process just as is. So I'll talk a little bit about the design of the process first, and then we'll get into the specific issues. So we split the process into two phases. We had a co-development and information sharing phase, and then we have a consultation events and activities phase. So everything on the screen here is what we had planned for phase one and what we executed. So I'll start on the top left. We first started with an Indigenous advisory process, and so this was a group made up of 17 different Indigenous organizations, whether it be national, regional, women's, or youth groups. And their role was essentially to provide us, the department, with advice and recommendations on how we should structure the consultation phase to meet the different needs of First Nations across the country. So their sort of sole role was to provide us with those advice and recommendations on what it should look like. A few months later, in April of 2024, we released a rights holders information kit. So that's largely what this presentation today is based off of. That kit was really just created to sort of equip rights holders with all the information for consultation prior to actually having those consultation events. So it went into detail on the issues for consultation. It provided some plain language explanations of the registration provisions of the Indian Act. Also provided a fairly detailed history of all the legislative changes up to the present. Alongside those, we created community-specific data sheets. So each community received a few copies of the rights holder kit in hand, and they also received a sheet of paper that explained how the second generation cutoff impacts their registered population. So those were mailed out in April of 2024. Alongside that, we created a consultation readiness form. So we wanted First Nations to dictate when consultation began rather than us just starting it on our own timelines. So that was an optional form created to allow First Nations to let us know they were ready to be consulted. Also in April of 2024, we started providing information sessions to the public. So I think we're at over 70 sessions now and probably close to 2,000 participants. So just folks who have been interested in hearing more about the process, as well as to sessions like this to First Nations or organizations. And then the last two pieces of phase one were the consultation plan. So this really outlined in detail the steps for phase two. What is consultation actually going to look like? How will it unfold? And this was the product that was co-designed with that Indigenous advisory process, so with those groups that we worked with. So that was a joint sort of release based on the reports they submitted to us with their advice and recommendations. They did have a plethora of recommendations. Not all were included in that consultation plan, but we did want to create a space where those recommendations could still be visible and transparent. So that's why we created a What We Heard report. So anything that maybe fell out of scope or that both parties didn't agree on fell into the What We Heard report. So that's also available online. And we did have an Indigenous graphic recording artist visually depict the findings that were heard. So we kind of had some beautiful images created. One sort of acknowledging the harm done in the colonial history, and then another one sort of how we can move forward together through consultation. I know that was a lot of information. And then so now we're moving on to phase two. So this is what we're currently in. This is the consultation events and activities phase. So it unfolds in three major steps. The first one that we're in now is what we call First Nations-led solution development. So similarly, we didn't want to just present First Nations with solutions and have them pick one. We wanted the solutions themselves to come from the people who live the realities of the issues themselves. So we're working with 90 First Nations and representative organizations right now, and they'll be proposing possible solutions to both of the issues for consultation before the end of the year. We're going to take those solutions and they're going to be assessed by a registration reform and legal solutions committee. So it's about 20 to 30 different experts in the field. I'd say 95% of them being non-governmental. So folks from your representative organizations. We've got academics in the space, lawyers in the space, advocates, as well as some retired senators who have worked in Indian Act reform. And the goal of this committee is really for them to look at the solutions that have been proposed and assess them for their legal viability and to provide an impact assessment as well. So we essentially want to know, do these solutions as proposed work with existing Canadian legislation? Do they work with our human rights frameworks? Do they respect and uphold UNDRIP? So them for each to individually provide their own assessment. And then as well as an impact assessment. So what does the solution look like from a community perspective? What does it look like from a gendered lens? Finances, what does this look like in terms of demographics? How might the solution impact me in 20 years? So that's kind of their role as experts in the field to be able to provide that assessment on what's been proposed. And then finally in the spring, we plan to launch consultation events themselves. So the ideal sort of result of the legal committee is to come out of it with almost a guide for consultation. So it'll essentially detail which partners, viewed the X solution as viable. Here's the impacts that have been identified so that in consultation event, community members can see, okay, I see which solutions have been deemed viable by people I trust and know. And we can kind of have a full picture before we're selecting a solution. So that's really the idea there. There will also be a call for proposals. So we will fund those consultation events. So if your First Nation wants to host them, you're more than welcome to, and we as a department will support that in order to sort of hear back from communities what is the desired solution to the issues. Okay, so that was the overview of the process. I know it's very detailed. Now I'll just get into a brief overview of the issues themselves. So first we'll talk about the second generation cutoff. So in 1985, Bill C-31 was created, and what it did was create two different registration categories that people could be registered under. So the rules as applied after 1985 would be if you're registered under 6.1, that means you have one parent who is, two parents who are registered or entitled. If you're registered under 6.2, that means you only have one registered or entitled parent. How the second generation cutoff works, as you guys know, is after 2 consecutive generations where you parent with somebody who is not entitled, that third generation would be not entitled to registration. I don't know if, okay, you can see my mouse, great. So this image sort of depicts it. The important date here in question is that 1985 date. So if you're born before 1985, the old rules apply to you, versus if you're born after 1985, that new rule would apply to you. So we can see in the second generation here, you've got 3 children originating from our ancestors here. On the left side, that person's entitled under 6.2 because they're born after 1985. They're born in 87. And they only have one entitled parent. So only the grandfather here is entitled. So therefore, if they parent with someone who's not entitled, as they did, their child is not entitled. If we move on to the middle, this second generation was born in 83. So the old rules will apply. They're registered under 6.1. They also parented with someone who's not entitled, but their child is registered just under 6.2. And then on the right here, we've got 2 entitled parents, and they both under 6.1, and then their child would be registered under 6.1. So this image kind of depicts how, even within the same family unit with the same ancestors, you can have those grandchildren be registered under different entitlements or not registered at all. Okay, so that's the second generation cutoff. I'll move on to the Section 10 voting thresholds, which is the second issue for consultation. So I'll just briefly explain the difference between the different types of First Nations. So similarly in 85 under Bill C-31, there was 2 different types of band membership that were created. So you could either be registered under Section 10. So in all cases, the government still determines registration and entitlement on a federal level. With Section 10 First Nations, they have the ability to create their own rules and membership codes. So we will register someone, but somebody needs to be accepted into that First Nation based on that First Nation's rules and codes. So it's possible that we register someone federally, but somebody is not accepted to that First Nation. With Section 11, once you're registered on the federal level, you automatically gain membership to that First Nation. And then with self-governing, kind of similar to Section 10, it really depends on the First Nation. So you might be asking why we are including this issue in consultation. So we know the process to transition from Section 11 to Section 10 has proven quite complicated, and that can be for a number of reasons. One of the ones that we have identified most often is the difficulty in obtaining consent from your members. And that's because you need to undergo a double majority voting threshold. So there's 3 main steps to transition from Section 11 to Section 10. The first thing you need to do is provide notice to all your members. The second thing would be to obtain consent. So, for example, if you had 1,000 eligible electors in your community, 501 of those people would need to physically show up to the vote, and then half of those, 251, would need to vote in favor. We know that this can be sometimes complicated, especially with a nation of your size. Trying to get 15,000 people to show up for a vote might be challenging. It might also be that you don't have updated contact information for everyone. A lot of people live off of reserve, or there could be a number of reasons, but these are some that we're aware of. So we know that this double majority is sometimes a barrier for nations to sort of gain that autonomy and establish their own membership rules and codes. The last thing that you need to do would be to protect acquired rights if you want to transition. So everybody who had status or had entitlement to membership the day before your rules took effect, they would need to maintain that entitlement after the rules take effect. This is my last slide. I know this is an information overload, so I apologize. So this just talks a little bit about our timelines and our next steps. So in December of 2024, we launched phase 2, which was the events and activities phase. Chief was correct in saying that this is not consultation events just yet, though. In December of 2025, so next month we'll be expecting those final reports from partners detailing those options for solutions. We'll also be releasing the second call for proposals, so to fund those events and activities in the springtime, those consultation events. In February, we'll have that legal committee assess the solutions that have been proposed. And then in April, we'll release the consultation guide, which will have the solutions that have been proposed and their viability and impact assessments. And the events will begin. And then in the fall of next year, it would be ideal that we could introduce a solution either through standalone legislation or if it's still included in Bill S2, it would be that 12-month delay coming into force timeline where we'd have the opportunity to go back to the House and the Senate and let them know what we heard during consultation. So that is all. Thank you for listening to a lengthy presentation and happy to open the floor to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. You might want to put your presentation back on, so, I don't know, maybe the community, I don't know. But I just wanted to go back to, I don't know what, the overview of collaborative process, the Indigenous advisory process. I guess I'm pretty boggled in the sense of how come no First Nations were involved to be the advisory?
It's an excellent question. Truthfully, I don't have a perfect answer for you, and I will just be honest about that. It's difficult to design a process with 650 different pieces of input. We did learn from some past consultations, and we heard that feedback from First Nations, but we use the representative organizations sort of as a mean, as representatives for First Nations. We did also have one of them being a Anishinaabe Nation, so they did join and participate. But generally it was sort of to try and cast a wider net just for the design piece. So they didn't provide us with advice and recommendations on what to do about the problems. It was just how do we structure it.
I just have one more before Councillor Paulus Bomberry. I guess I'm going to go to First Nations membership under Section 10. I guess my question is, does the government demand 50% eligible voters to show up at their polls? And do they demand 50% of those voters to have to vote in favor of that platform? Is that what happens?
To my understanding, no. I'm not an expert in in that, but we certainly acknowledge that the double majority voting threshold isn't effective and it doesn't work, and that's why it's included in consultation so that we can fix it. So what we're looking to hear is feedback on how we can improve it, and maybe it's as simple as you change it to a simple majority. Maybe you allow online voting. So that's what we're looking to hear through this process is how it can be improved.
Go ahead, Councillor Paulus Bomberry.
Yeah, I have a few issues with it as well. It's similar to Chief Hill. Why were First Nations, such as the larger First Nations, Six Nations, not even considered to be part of this? When you know we are the largest First Nation by population in Canada. Some consideration should have been given. And when you say you meet with the representative groups, we represent ourselves. Nobody represents us. Not AFN, not Chiefs of Ontario. We speak for ourselves. So now our voice has been totally left out of this entire process. And that's wrong. Because the way we handle things here and who our members are, like we're a sovereign people here. We have a right to determine our own sovereignty, our own status people, our own membership as well. And I believe that the federal government should be honoring who our members are and also giving them status because they've been vetted by our community. They have ties to our community. And that funding should also come along with them. So right now, that's one of the biggest issues. You put all these people on the list and they only have one parent and it goes on forever and ever. So that in fact, what you're creating is almost like Métis people. So I guess you can use that funding to help support it. But funding has to come to the First Nations. We are stretched in post-secondary dollars. We have over $4 million worth of education that people weren't able to attend this year because of lack of funding from the federal government. We have housing strain. We have water, sewage. All these things have to be taken into account. You go and make a rule, you make a law, but in fact, the impact on the First Nations is so huge, I don't think anybody has considered it. It's okay to go and find First Nations representative groups, but you didn't get to right down to the grassroots, to the real people. And right now, we have so many impacts that are impacting us right now without letting, or you putting a whole bunch of people on for, this is in perpetuity you're talking about. So it won't ever stop. So eventually, there will be no First Nations, Six Nations reserve here. Over time, that's what will have happened. And you will have started it, and you will have continued your assimilation, your genocide, and we can't stand for that. None of us should be standing for it. No First Nation. I don't know who you're talking to who agrees with what you're saying here. I do agree there is discrimination. And I think that needs to be resolved, but not at the hands of everybody else and putting them in more and more poverty than they already are and more debt. The federal government has to come up with money, and that's part of the solution. But they also have to let the First Nations lead. And we need to be contacted. Chief?
Councillor Fraser?
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. Yeah, sorry I was late, Councillor Greg Fraser. I had just a comment or a question at the beginning concerning when they first introduced the second generation cutoff. There was some type of a special minister's representative that was involved in that. Now, this special minister's representative is also involved in Métis membership. So, as of course, we are strictly opposed, right, to Bill C-53. So this already discredits, I think, your special minister's representative now determining the second generation cutoff in our membership. The question I had is, you have on here sections, I guess it was when you had the S2 and then, right, and then you have this bill is not really looked upon favorably in some First Nations, as you know. One of the things that we did see, for example, when you're dealing with a 6-2 and you have a non-First Nation or another First Nation, excuse me, another First Nations from, say, from New York State, right? And they do have a child, right? And they become, right? They become non-eligible. They then become, if you have a 6-1 to do the same thing, then you drop to a 6-2. Now that's, you know, that discretionary power to make that determination is done on your representative, on the registrar's end. That's not done on our end. The discretionary power, and I think it was in section 7 of the Indian Act says, right, that you cannot assume they're non-native. So let's see if they're not even put on the birth certificate. If they're not put on the birth certificate, even though we know that they are for the father or the mother is a First Nation, well, they then drop. So they then lose the level of status that they're entitled to. So these discretionary powers, I think, should rest with the First Nation, not with a third-party registrar that doesn't know the circumstances. And I think there should be some type of either veto power or discretionary power at the First Nation level to determine that, because we do know our community. We do know our people. Our people are on both sides of the border, right? And sometimes, yes, and sometimes one of the parents is reluctant to go on the birth certificate. So that's another issue that should be addressed. And I think that there's more discretionary power should be put to the First Nation, regardless if you're in Section 10 or Section 11. And it's going to be impossible for us, right, as you know. And the last comment I had to make is that why didn't you come to us first? We're the largest First Nation in Canada, right? And we're mixed in with, okay, a very large non-First Nation area too as well. But we do have issues here and we can determine our own membership. But this doesn't allow us to do that.
Councillor Van Avery?
I don't think I was that high up on the list. Thank you. I'm wondering, as you can hear, there's a lot of frustration. We've had, and just in this term, we've had government representatives come and sit here and present things on bills where we are questioned at the very end of a process. We're asked for input at the very end of a process, and so I'm hoping that you can understand the frustration that is coming out here, because it doesn't appear as though, like, this isn't, it doesn't seem like a reconciliation practice. It seems like, again, you're shoving something down our throats that we didn't necessarily ask for, and if we did ask for it, it's not made the way we asked for it to be made. So my question is about the Indigenous advisory process and the 17 organizations involved. I haven't been able to find who they are anywhere posted online. So if you know those offhand.
I can find it for you right now, actually.
And then while you're doing that, the consultation, events, and activities portion or phase, there's solution impacts, and you mentioned that committee will be 95% non-governmental people. But how much of the committee will be Indigenous?
Sorry, I'm not connected. Sorry, I'm not connected to the internet, so I was trying to get you your answer to the first one. But I can answer that last question quickly.
Sure.
So each person's either an expert in the field or are First Nation. We haven't, surveyed each one of them individually, but I would say about 80% of them are First Nations themselves.
Is there a way for us to have some sort of guarantee that the people that are in these advisory positions and in this one, consultation and events, like, it doesn't make sense to me that you consult people that are not us, how to deal with us. That's offensive. Why are you doing that? It seems terribly archaic.
Councillor Key?
Good evening. Thank you for the start of this journey. I've been advocating for a number of years with my students at the university and in the community here, my people in the community here. I don't know what level you are within the hierarchy. I just find that, and I don't take offense to this, but I feel like they sent the janitors to talk to us. So don't take offense to that, but that's what it seems like. Especially because, as my colleagues have said, we had our largest community and we weren't even consulted, because we know the Crown has a duty to consult and accommodate with free, prior, and informed consent. That has never happened in this process yet. You're the first ones to attend. So I'm always advocating as well that we have to become the architects of our own destiny, not some bureaucrat in Gatineau or on Yonge and Bloor Street in Toronto that sit in some kiosk or boardroom table. Now some of them are immigrants determining my destiny. There's an imbalance there, and I hope you can take that message back to whoever you report to, that we are very confused and frustrated by this process. We have to become the architects of our destiny. And if that means taking over membership, we will do it. We wouldn't dare say this to somebody in another country. You wouldn't dare say that to the Francophone in Quebec. But here we are trying to determine who's going to be on our band or in our citizenship. So I hope you can take that message back, because I'm really frustrated with this process, knowing that there's a duty to consult and accommodate with free, prior, and informed consent. That never happened here. That never happened here. So hopefully you can take that back, and that's why I really am frustrated with this process, and I apologize for my passion for my people. It's just that we're so frustrated, and this is 2025, and we're still acting like 1924. 100 years later, we're still being treated the same way. So if you can take that back to whoever your manager or your director, please have them come and visit us, and we can start going through this. And I too want to know who the 17 organizations are. Like, they didn't represent us, or they didn't come to see us to represent our thoughts on this. Anyway, so I just want to stop there because I'll probably have more comments and questions as we proceed. Thank you very much.
Councillor Bombay.
Good evening. Hope you got deep pockets, because as you can see, you're taking a lot back with you. And without repeating what everybody said, but for me to try and put this in simple terms, and that was one of my first questions, is who are these 17 national indigenous organizations or PTOs? They're not the rights holders. They don't have the rights. We do, but you're not asking us. So it's like you going to ask Elena over there what's good for me. Or that's like China asking the United States what's good for Canada. I don't know if you can see how ridiculous that is. So you need to talk to the people who you're impacted. Like, you talk to these 17 organizations, you're making a law that's going to directly impact the rights holders, but you're not talking to the right holder. And I know years ago, probably a good 10, 12 years ago, for Six Nations, we started to develop a citizenship code at the direction of, it was called INAC back then. Well, you guys have so many different names, it's hard to keep track. To develop one, and you had asked for us to develop it before you guys started creating legislation, and I forget what you were creating back then. So we did that, sent it to you guys before you guys started. You guys approved yours, but then all of a sudden, oh, we're not approving yours. So it's difficult to have a trust when you have a government agency, a department, who has never been very straightforward, truthful, and honest in what they're saying. They say this, but they do this. Same thing with this. You're saying everything that you're going to do for us is going to fix all the problems that you guys created in the past, but you didn't ask us. You didn't ask us in the first place. So it's just ridiculous. So, I mean, to echo what everybody else is saying, you need to talk to the right holders. You need to let us decide. We're not dumb people. We're not stupid people. We know what's good for us. So you need to listen to us. So I know I know we're online, so I know there's probably some people listening who are part of your department. So that goes all the way back to the federal government. You guys, I know you guys like to invent laws, but then you figure out how it's going to work after. You guys are backwards out most of the time. Thank you.
Councillor Jameson.
I have a couple of questions, but I have a number of observations. One of the questions I had was, I understand from 85 to 87, there was simple majority was the rule. Now it's switched, and you said there's a possibility switch back. What was the rationale back then when it was simple majority, and what caused the switch?
I can speak to that a little bit. So before Bill C-31 was introduced, there was, in my readings of, the meetings that happened before then, efforts to, because nations, they wanted to allow some way for nations to have autonomy over their membership. So I believe it was more of an expedited process during that time. So there was a grace period following C-31 from 85 to 87 that allowed for First Nations to take control during that time. And so it was, I suppose, a simple majority, and it was following a court case, I want to say maybe 90s or early 2000s, where the court ordered that, all of the members' rights be respected in such a vote. So it was determined and interpreted that a double majority was needed to make sure that the votes weren't just happening in a small area, that all of the members were informed and showed up to the vote to participate, and that the decision would represent the majority of the eligible electors.
You brought to mind
Can you use your mic?
an old council legend. He was John Peters. And I remember him back in that time railing about the fact that when the government wants something to happen, it's simple majority. When they do not it's double majority. I just remember those words. And also when you were talking, brought back all these memories, the time of the C-31, the marketing, if you will, then was there will be no loss, no gain. Do you remember that? No loss, no gain. That's, in simple words, how they sold the whole darn thing. And at the time, one of the big concerns, using Audrey's example, was the post-secondary. And they said, we'll show you even. There will be no loss, no gain, because we're worried always about the funding. We never have enough, and then what's going to happen? They said, we will segregate the post-secondary funding for they called them C-31ers. You're too young to remember that. Or did you read it in your reading, your research? Well, that's what they did. And that caused a big stink across Canada, here in Ontario, but more particularly in the West. Did you read that? They were so infuriated, a lot of First Nations out there, that the women, they considered them, they're calling them white women, come back. They said they're not coming here, and they would burn down their homes and everything else, to the extent that what ISC did here in Ontario region for post-secondary, I'm just using this as an example, is they would get some First Nations to administer post-secondary funds for the C-31s. You aware of that? They did. That's what they did. You must remember that, Audrey. You're the whole educator here. But anyway, this so reminds me of that. Except now the government is not saying anything about no loss, no gain. And that's got us fearful. And my colleague over there, Amos, he always likes to reference this FPIC thing, the free and prior informed consent. And I ask you, in your government, by doing this and adding all those, I don't know, Laurie would told us, I can't remember how many, would that add to our list, our membership, Laurie, do you recall? It was a lot if this went through. It was a lot. She's ill, so we'll forgive her. No, but some of you might, but it was thousands. And you know already how hard pressed we are. So you have to think about, I call it window dressing. This FPIC, the UNDRIP, in Canada finally accepted it. Now they got a work plan of how they're going to implement it. But again, it's a big marketing tool as far as I'm concerned, for when they enter the world stage, they'll say, look at us, Canada, we finally accepted this, we've endorsed it, but it doesn't follow through. And again, to illustrate the example I gave about the C-31's no loss, no gain. So is that any kind of free and prior and informed consent? I say it is not. What it is the continuation of the agenda the Crown has had for us ever since they stepped on our land and claimed title to it. Their royal proclamation, if you will. And that agenda, they took Canada, or England back then, took a little different approach. And the U.S. down there, they warred upon our brothers down there and subjugated them and then stuck them on the reserves. Here they did the same darn thing. But it was by these treaties. That's what they did. And you know very well, you've been doing research on us, so you know our history. And the reason our people were put on all these reserves across Canada was to get rid of us. Extinguish those Indians. Take them to the residential school. Teach them how to be farm and whatever. And they're to stay on their darn reserves. And our brothers in the north, us too, they really felt the impacts. They were trappers. They could no longer go on their trapping lines. They had to stay. This whole thing again to get rid of us. And that's what this is doing there is no, what did they call it there, that FPIC or UNDRIP? There's no demonstration of that to me. And that only discontinues that whole agenda, because what the government is wanting for us to do now is they're offering, they're good at pivoting. They would use different terminology. It was, they picked up the phrase, oh, they're First Nations, that they're in First Nations, and it's their inherent right. So now there's all these self-government agreements, and there are your buddies there in Ottawa seem to favor the West. Well, the West is a whole different kettle of fish than us here. They never had no treaties. I went out there quite a few years ago for different meetings, and I thought, oh my God, if you talked like that here, you'd be strung up on one of your totem poles. In that Haida agreement, what do they have to do? They extinguish their Aboriginal rights. Again, they have a whole different mindset, because their rights, their history is totally different than ours. So that's, if you're honest with yourselves, I know your bosses sure aren't. This is what they're pushing, and it's to get rid of us. And if they did it, they would do what they had said they were going to do way back in with the C31 85 days. No loss, no gain. That means if people are going to be registered, they don't lose their entitlement, then the funding has to come with it. Because, and again, what they're pushing big here is to make us into municipalities. And by that, it's like we're being pressured, because we used to have what still exists, if you want, the band support funding. Way back 20, 30 years ago, we said our size, given our size, it's like, because there's a formula, you must be aware of that. There's a formula. And us, there's like a number in Ontario, large First Nations. So when you apply that formula, we used to laugh. It wasn't funny, but it was like we get a nickel on a dollar of what it costs. Now it must be like a penny on every $100. And in that regard, I understand there's this, what the heck is that called next? Governance modernization. Are you aware of that? Well, your government put out an RFP maybe 4 years ago for whoever to apply to do this report. And what it is, somebody's got their hand up over there. Oh, okay. What it is essentially to examine the cost for First Nations governance. And one of the focuses is this band support funding that I've talked about. Because if you don't know about it, you won't be able to answer this, because I was going to say that must be about done. We went to, Helen and I, we went to meetings yesterday and the day before in Toronto, with ISC, that gathering, the joint gathering. And there was, and they have breakout rooms, and that didn't really pertain to us. So I went and met that guy, remember the finance guy? Because I want to know what are all the options. And I'm questioning. He's the one that told me about it. I didn't know about it. He told me about it. And he figured it must be just about done. And then the Canada will have to decide on that. But you're just trying to see, is there any light here at all? Just because we are so totally underfunded. But you're not even aware of that. Oh, well.
Sorry, I don't know about the program you're talking about, but
it's not a program. They're doing research across Canada with First Nations. What is the cost
per registered
governance, First Nations governance? And a focus of that, foundation of that would be that band support funding I was talking about.
I can say I know that there are funding formulas related to the number of registered people, and I can also speak to the fact that I've just from where I sit in this engagement team, that First Nations often say that they're underfunded for several.
Say they're underfunded. We are underfunded.
I'm sorry, that's not what I meant. I just mean like I listen. I'm listening. I'm just I don't know enough about the funding formulas personally, but I'm here as a representative, or like I want to amplify your voices. You tell me what what you think needs to change, and that's I'm a middle person, to speak to my level. You're right, I'm not like a manager or director, but like I want to hear what's needed, and then I'll advocate for you.
Money. No loss, no
The
gain.
ans-
No loss, no gain. And while you were saying the representatives, just to echo what my colleague said, those organizations, whoever they might be, they're not rights holders. AFN is not a rights holder, and they sure as heck don't speak for Six Nations of the Grand River, nor does the Chiefs of Ontario. Matter of fact, those people are, it seems to me, are doing us a disservice. That AFN executive, when they worked all those years for that child welfare reform, and they were ordered by the Human Rights Tribunal, and we said, well, forget it, we'll have a made in Ontario solution. That's the way we roll. We don't have to be looking at them and what they're doing. We're looking at what do we need here, and we will advocate and we'll challenge and move forward for what we need here for Six Nations of the Grand River.
Okay, just before Councillor Johnson, go ahead, Chastity.
We just have a Facebook question. Why aren't there any fixes for the non-natives who married native men that gained status? Those same women carry and pass on status due to no correction. Bill C-31 applied to native women and native men, yet native men could pass their status to non-native women. Do those women still have status after divorce?
As long as that divorce happened after 1985, there's nothing in the act to remove that entitlement for those women. However, um, there if there was any reason for a loss of status before 1985, they're not eligible for reinstatement, and their children, if the other parent is not entitled, are also not entitled.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Johnson. Then I'll go to you.
Yes. First of all, thank you for coming. And right now, I wouldn't want to be sitting in your chair because I think you can feel and sense the impact of everything that has occurred to Native people. Way back when, still today. It seems like our voices are never honored to have a voice in anything that the government decides they want to do. That has to stop. Otherwise, you're going to be impacted by such things where Native people are revolting or will revolt to get their voices heard. I just want to read just what I wrote down here. It seems to me, and ever since I was myself a small child, that the First Nations people seem to be the government's guinea pigs. Their focus is on such details, right down to the nitty gritty. And the question is, why does the government need to have control over us, on us? No matter which way we turn, that government's there to stop us. I want to ask you a question. What in particular did the government want to accomplish by this second generation cutoff? What prompted them to get to this point and want to do this? Do you know?
I can speak to, again, what we know from 1985. I don't personally believe that it's correct, but there was concern among some First Nations that sort of the lower and lower you go down the bloodline, that these people weren't actually part of community or weren't actually fully First Nation. And so there was a concern of how long do we pass on status for, and that was supposedly the government's response to that concern of how much longer can someone parent with someone who's also not entitled and continue to pass on that status. So in 1985, that was, I mean, that's the reason we were given. I can't speak to whether that was the true intention or not, but that's what our understanding is.
Okay, so the next thing that I had was, let's compare it to if First Nations people were the rulers. And we dissected everything about all the nationalities that have come here. Today, we're not happy with you being who you are, so today we want to make you over and make you something back here. That's basically what the story is about Native people. Like the kids that have been sent into the residential schools so mistreated, that was way back in the 19, whenever they started. It still has its impacts on everybody today. And yet there's people walking around who don't, just tells you to get over it. So if you've been traumatized and people have hurt you, it's really unfair to say to them, get over it. It's impossible. I know people in our community who went there and how it impacted their lives. I've grown up with girls who were in there. You can start the topic, be sitting with them, that topic starts, what happens? The tears start flowing. And that's from way back in the 50s. That's how sad it is. It's a burden you carry forever. So, I don't know, I don't like this either. Along with my colleagues, it's not. Native people haven't been treated very well at all by the government. And I guess they're going to continue doing that as long as we allow them to. But I think everybody's fed up with that now. Thank you.
Go ahead, Brenda.
Good evening, everybody. So I wanted to talk about points that were made before. And we look at the Indian Act, you go back to the beginning, and in 1869, the Enfranchisement Act. And I was raised by my grandparents, so language, ceremony, living the simple life of no hydro, no running water. You go get your water in a well. The water was really good, really safe to drink then. And so I learned our Ongwehowe Neha, our way of life, our political structure, our social structure, and how that works and how that is intended to be. And then I go back and look at the Enfranchisement Act and the simple rules for being enfranchised without your consent was to be of good moral character, to be have no debt, and to have an education beyond grade 6 and university or college or high school, whatever. But what our people traditionally have done is they have exercised their sovereignty by not encouraging, supporting, and getting into those systems. Like not the aspect of the residential schools, that was forced. A lot of them would, back in the day, they would be transferring their kids back and forth across the border, basically smuggling their own children into family over there or back over here when it got tough. The agents were looking for them. Or maybe they didn't go, but they had to live a life where I want you to think about your home, your bedroom growing up when you were a child, and what your room looked like, that it reflected you, that home reflected you. How many pictures are on the wall? How many posters? How much clothes do you got in your closet? That kind of stuff that reflects that you exist and you are safe. Because there's a whole bunch of generations and generations of our people that they didn't have that. They had to be able to go at a moment's notice and go hide, whether it was summer, winter, whatever, raining, pouring, to go hide somewhere so those agents couldn't come and take them. So they had no connection to who they simply are to be human, to be a person, to be a child, to be safe, all that stuff. You know about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. All those things that we need to become healthy people, strong people. So they exercised it by saying education is not a good thing. But what they were referring to was the residential schools. Don't send your children because they're being tortured, they're being beaten, they're being mistreated there. They're not being fed. Like, there's a lot of horror stories, a lot of realities. I was appalled when I went to the cultural center, or not the cultural center, the mush hole is all I can say, Mohawk Institute. And the displays and everything, it's all nice. It was all on the boys' side. The girls' side, it was interesting and appalling that the man who ran the facility, his quarters were on the girls' side. That was horrible. Like easy access, right? So you can imagine, we've heard the experiences of people, and I don't use the word story because story is once upon a time, blah, 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 the end, or as in Cinderella's case, happily ever after. We don't have that kind of story. We have lived experiences. So I don't use stories. We don't have stories. We have lived experiences. Because a story, the government can say, oh, it's just a story. You can dismiss that. We've been dismissed enough. So the Indian Act, I've gone back and read even before 1869, there was documents that were being applied. And it remains a system that is oppressive, it's genocidal, and it's still discriminatory based on race of who we are, our religion, our gender, our ongwehoe neha, like our way of life, the way we socially organize, politically, socially, everything the way we live is based on our bloodlines. So when I studied the Indian Act from the very beginning, it was done intentionally to mix up and dilute our bloodlines because we follow our mother's bloodlines. So that's why the women lost their status, because those are our bloodlines. And I've said this to our people, traditional people, that those families, like depending on how far you go back, well, no, really no. On the female side, genealogy follows the female bloodline. That determines who you are. As a Haudenosaunee, it determines your clan and your nation. That's your bloodline. And the Indian Act came in to dilute that, mix it up, create confusion. I see people doing their genealogies. They're following the fathers, or they're jumping all over it. And you can't do that. It's just look at the women. That's all you do, is what is your mother, grandmother, great-grandmother. Like, you can go back. Our community has that ability to go back those generations because they've been keeping track. Our traditional government is keeping track of that. But there's no remedy for that. Like, if you're only going back to when you institute this, you're leaving out a lot of bloodlines, because in those 1800s and stuff, took a lot of our bloodlines out. They tried not to, by discouraging them to marry off. Like, don't marry off. I heard that all the time. Marry Oklahoma. Don't marry non-native, because at a time of survival, you lose, the adults lose the patience and motivation to explain all of this stuff. As to, where you're in survival mode, you're worried about feeding your kids, you're worried about keeping your kids safe, keeping them from going to a residential school. So it doesn't follow it. And then when we look at the implications, a lot of this issue of pretend Indianism and descendants and stuff like that, giving people who have no connection to a community, knowledge, bloodline, no teachings, no lived experience, a card that they can say, I'm Native, so I deserve this job. And they're looking for people who have traditional indigenous knowledge. But because they have a status card, they can say the superficial stuff that the outside world don't know, and they'll believe and stuff like that. But sit back and watch it from somebody who knows it. It's not the same. You're diluting, confusing people. You're misrepresenting our knowledge, our rights, who we are. So when you look at this, it still doesn't follow our Ongwahoe Neha. Those are our bloodlines. And there are some out there. And this status card that you're doing doesn't change the fact that we don't have bloodlines in our community because those women gained status. So there's a lot of families don't have bloodlines. But their status, they're paternal because they're following their fathers. But when you follow our Ongwahoe Neha, they don't have no clan, they have no nation. So that's one of the impacts and implications, that a lot of ours are bloodlines are diluted. And then we've got bloodlines in here that don't exist. So you want to, they've never remedied that. Never. They just keep creating all these changes, but never addressing the real reason why they did it, which was to assimilate our people and dilute the bloodlines. That's what this is all about. You go back far enough in history, you look at it. I looked at it from a traditional perspective because that's what I was raised. My grandparents talked about this stuff all the time. I thought they were lying because we weren't being taught this stuff in school. I had to learn this when I got, realized when I was going to college and university, this is what your true history is. And I'm like, what the heck? They knew exactly what they were talking about. So this thing is really flawed, and it doesn't address anything for our community. I agree with whoever said you're creating Métis nations. If that's what you want to do, then put them over in the Métis nation. They're trying to nation build themselves. Put them over there. We have our ways, and this has never been, and it's still not respective of our Ongwahoe Neha. Thank you. Oh, same as the double blind voting. That's another way that our traditional people exercise their sovereignty, is that they don't vote because of 1924, where they went and where the majority of our community was that day was at our longhouse at Lower Cugas. 85, you look at the newspapers, you go back far enough, they'll tell you 85% of the community was down there, and we had 13 people providing 26 votes to change the governance here. That's never been a majority vote. No double blind vote either. And they won't, because they're exercising their sovereignty by not participating. And the system doesn't acknowledge that. Our traditional governance still exists. And yet they're being marginalized. And they're the ones that these treaties are with. Their bloodlines signed those agreements. This is a oppressive, genocidal, and racist document, and it always has been. The ideas that you're coming up with, they don't flush. They don't work. Not for our traditional people anyways. Thank you.
Councillor Miller?
Okay. I realize you're the messenger, you're not the decision maker, so I won't holler at you. My concern is, I'm concerned with the whole second generation cutoff and voting 10 threshold, because I think the voting 10 threshold is going to be trying to force Six Nations to take over membership. And we're not ready to do that right now. My other concern is, I don't know, I think most people don't know, and I'm assuming people here don't know, that there's like 7 categories when you register under Indian Affairs. 7 categories of Indians. And I'll use the word Indian because we're talking about the Indian Act. So My concern is when people go to register their child, they don't know. They don't ask, they don't know, because nobody knows really what category the child is registered under. I didn't know when I registered my children. I never thought there was a category that they were getting put in. I didn't know that, and I don't think most people do. What concerns me is the 6-2 category, where children are registered as half Indian, if the mother refuses to name the father, or if the father is non-native, or if the father is from the United States, a reserve in the United States. They're still, the mother would be Six Nations, full-blooded Six Nations. The father in the States could be full-blooded Onondaga, but the child is registered as half, because Indian Affairs don't recognize the First Nations in the States. They don't recognize Native American parents. So right now, Ontario has 82,596 children. People are registered under 6-2. That means people that are half, considered as half Native. There's 322,173 in all of Canada where people are registered as half Native. The large majority of those people probably are all full-blooded, but for various reasons they're registered as a half Native, because the woman probably didn't name the father. We are a traumatized people. We have been a traumatized people ever since Christopher Columbus got lost and discovered North America. These women, there could be a lot of reasons why a woman does not want to name the father. The father might not want to take responsibility. The woman could have been raped maybe and got pregnant. She could have been having an affair maybe. I mean, I know that sounds silly, but if you think of it, there's all kinds of reasons that someone might not want to name the father of their child, but they're being forced. These women are being forced to register their child as half because they refuse to name the father. And I don't know how traumatizing that might be, because it didn't happen to me, but I think if they knew what they were doing, and I don't think a lot of women do know that what the 6-2 is doing to their child. And I think that would be very traumatic if you found out my child's only registered as half. You know, when they get maybe 16 years old and find out your kid's only registered as half. So the fact that they're being forced to do that, though, by the Indian Act is very disturbing to me. And the thing is, I never really started looking at all this until the second generation cutoff came to be. That's when I started looking at all this, and I thought, this is wrong. The 6-2 is wrong. And I want Six Nations to challenge that in court. That's what I want. Somebody has to challenge that, because it's not right. These kids are full-blooded First Nations kids. A lot of them are. I know there's some that aren't, but most of them would be full-blooded if they could name the father, or if they could go from the States to here. And somebody has to challenge that, because it's not right. We say every child matters, but yet we have all of these 322,173 kids in Canada that don't matter, because they're all considered as half Native, when in fact they probably are full Native. And that's my concern. And Six Nations, and don't quote me if I might be wrong, but I think Six Nations is close to about 3,500 of children registered under 6-2. 3,500, I think it's 3,400 or something. I don't know if Jenny knows, but it's close to that. That are registered as half. That's at Six Nations. Now, if every one of those children, for example, married a non-Native, their kids probably wouldn't get on the list. But the child would be, if the child wasn't registered as a 6-2, then they could pass it to their children. That has to be fixed. I don't know if that's came up in any of your consultations that you've had. I don't think it comes up often because I don't think a lot of people realize what it is, how dangerous that 6'2" is. They don't realize it. Most people don't know their kids registered under 6'2". You know, when you get pregnant and you go to hospital, have your baby, and you get all the papers going to sign it, you're just hurrying up to sign and register your kid, make sure they get on the list. I never looked to see what the category was that my children were being registered under. And like I said, you know, I just now started looking at it from this thing you're doing now. Made me look at it, and I'm really concerned about that. And that has to be addressed somehow, somewhere, because it's very, I don't like what's happening to our women, having to do that. So those are the concerns I have. I have a lot of concerns, but those are the ones that I wanted to bring up tonight. Hopefully someday there might be a court challenge to it, and I think there needs to be. So you might want to tell the higher ups that this woman down at Six Nations, she wants to challenge the 6'2", and I just might do that. If I have to, if nobody else will, I'll do it myself. Anyway, that's my concerns with it.
Go ahead, Jenny.
Just wanted to make a little correction. I know Councillor Helen said it was 3,462. It was 8,713, and that was 2 years ago. So we'd have to do another count.
See, that's a lot. We've had over 4,000 people registered since these new, that 6'2" and all those. They're coming out of the woodwork. And the first thing they do when they get on the list is they call Six Nations, want to know where's my education money? Where's my house? Where's my land? This is what they want. This is what they do. The phone's ringing constantly, asking, where's Six Nations? What is it? Never heard of it before. But yet they're able to get a status card. And they want their education. They want one man, I know one man called a few years ago, and 50 years ago, I think, he paid for his own education. He wanted to get reimbursed. This is the kind of stuff that's going on the ground, so to speak. So it's a big issue.
Go ahead, Chastity.
Another online question: how does this affect our families who are born and raised in the USA?
So to be registered in Canada, you have to descend or be affiliated with a First Nation in Canada. So although it doesn't matter where you can live in the States or you can live across the world. Entitlement under the Act is specific to those who have ancestors who are entitled under the Act.
Okay, Councillor Fraser.
Yeah, my comment or question is, well, it's a little unfair. They sent you, you know, in here our concerns, because we would like to have someone, you know, that would be able to take it or be near to the top, the decision maker. So one of the things is we had a legislative process that, and Brenda brought it up about the water bill C-61, which would be a huge expense to the federal government. It went along through the same process that you outlined here, and then it was stalled. And so far it hasn't come back because, of course, it was a big expense to the government. This, on the other hand, looks like it's going to be moving through pretty quickly. It looks like it's going to go through, and again, we may have to go to the courts or something like that too. Well, you know, as you can see, there's strong opposition at this table to this S2. And then coming so far late in the game, right, being already courts, you say here November 26th, it was that third reading. That was yesterday.
We should have changed that date.
You changed it?
No, yeah, it hasn't happened yet.
Oh, because it's pending, right? So, and just to further our point is that we were never even asked, because there are parliamentary committees and witnesses that do want to come forth, either oppose things or are for things. Okay, well, we were never asked again. We were never asked for that. We did do that for the water, and of course, the water bill didn't go anywhere. And now we've got this, but the government didn't want that, right? It seems that they move things through the government that they want to do, whereas things can be stalled at any point. And I hope that our opposition to this, maybe that happens. Maybe it is stalled. So that's what we're going to be hoping for, right? So thanks.
Councillor Bomberry?
Right. I know, just to touch a little bit on what Greg's saying, what Brenda said about the Indian Act. When it came into place, it was always about control. Control the First Nations. Control the people, control where they live, control their natural resources, which has basically been raped from the earth. So it was always about control on who gets what. And they enacted this legislation to take their fiduciary responsibility. So to me, this all comes down to dollars and cents. Because in your program, say some rights, programs, benefits, and services are available to registered individuals. So if you do your second generation, then those are no longer registered. So that figure that's going to alleviate the government of having to be responsible for somebody because they can't get registered based on what you want to do with the second generation cutoff. So, and like Councillor Fraser said, it's always about the obligation within the Indian Act and what they're supposed to be doing. Sometimes those get stalled. But when they see an advantage of what they want to do with the Indian Act to reduce their costs, those things fly through. So this is all about dollars and cents. I mean, in just touching on the residential schools, they had no problem initiating those, spending all the money they did to take our language, our culture, our traditions from our people. Why can't they give that same obligation now to let us get it back? We struggle. People struggle. Like I don't speak because I've never been taught it. So that's all gone. So, but if they can have that same mindset on or the expense they took to take it away, why can't they have that same expense to give it back? Not only here on Six Nations, but all across Canada. Mm-hmm. So it's all about dollars and cents. Sometimes when there's a crisis in a third world and Canada wants to do something, all of a sudden they come up with millions and millions of dollars to help them. Mm-hmm. Makes them look good, but it doesn't help the First Nation. Mm-hmm. You want to help a third world country when you got, hundreds of thousands of First Nations people living in third world conditions right here in Canada. So turn that dollars and cents to where it's where their responsibility and obligation is, which is to the First Nations people.
So before I move on to Councillor Powis Bomberry, again, this is not consultation. This is an information session for the community. Go ahead, Councillor Powis Bomberry.
Thank you. Just a couple of things that I think that it's important that we add to it. One of them is land. We live on a postage stamp here on Six Nations. The highest population in Canada, and land is at a premium value right now. We have a lot of millionaires who have bought up a lot of the land, and so therefore when we have young people now who want to get married and build a house, they're having a hard time finding land, let alone build a house. So that's something that needs to be taken care of, and that additions to reserve needs to be done in 1 or 2 years, not 30 and 40 years waiting for us to get land back to Six Nations or any other First Nations. And the other part I have, I agree with my colleague, Councillor Johnson there, is that you can't make somebody another race. So why does the federal government think they can change non-members, non-natives into status natives? They can't. It's acquired status. And when that person gets divorced, that status should be removed. Acquired doesn't mean in perpetuity. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing I would like to see you move on. Is anybody writing it down? Please make note of that. We need to pass on our status under our rules. Six Nations knows Six Nations. Six Nations speaks for Six Nations. Nobody else. So if you go and clump us in, you're doing us a disservice. And that's not you, it's the federal government who's sitting there right now. Non-members are attracted to what they see on the reserve. Oh, not paying any taxes. So therefore, they want to set up businesses on here. They want to go in partnership with somebody, put somebody out in front to be as their ghost owner of a company where they reap all the benefits. And that has to stop. I know it's being stopped in other First Nations, so that's something that we need to look at as well, because we can't continue like this as well. We can't have our community live in fear, because we do have criminal elements on Six Nations. And those criminal elements need to be flushed out by the police, the OPP, everybody that needs to work together on this to stop this cannabis, this illegal cannabis trade. So those are the things that are affecting this First Nations, as well as all the damage that the federal government has done to us over the years. And the people who are looking at us with these little dollar signs in their eyes, they didn't pay their dues for Six Nations. Our ancestors paid those dues. And Six Nations land is for Six Nations people only. And that's the message I think that we have to get out to more and more people. And I believe that the people who decide for us is us. And I would like to see Six Nations representative on that committee that you're talking about, that 17 group that you've talked about. I would like to see us in that 18th group, as well as we have other sister First Nations who are the large groups, who are Haudenosaunee as well, who should be lumped together, because we all share many of the same problems and the same wishes for our future, as well as language and bloodlines. So that's my 2 cents. If you would take that back kindly to the federal government. And please, you're playing with our lives here right now. This isn't a book exercise, a university project, a research thing. This is people's actual lives in perpetuity. So it makes a difference right now that we make better decisions for all of us here at Six Nations. And we need the federal government's help in order to do that. So, Yao, we just thank you.
Councillor Key?
Yes, thank you. Listening to all these conversations tonight and this dialogue, I think it implores us to take over membership. We shouldn't be afraid of it. We shouldn't be risk adverse to it. If we are truly looking at our residual inherent rights under sovereignty, then we should be doing that. And I think we should be having hearings immediately on all these sections of the current membership under Indian Act. And then we'll deliver a report to you, whether we're going to defy this next section, or you're going to work with us and we're going to manage our own membership based on our Haudenosaunee values and ethics, right? Whether our young people want to marry Americans who are Haudenosaunee, they should be entitled to do that. But we should determine that. Again, not some bureaucrat in Gatineau or on Yonge and Bloor Street in Toronto. It should be us. It should be us that determines that. And the time has come. We always go right to the edge to Indian affairs and we come back. We've got to jump over and say, yes, we're going to do it. It's about time. I don't know what's stopping us. Spend a couple $1,000s and have a couple evenings of hearings from our community and have engagement with our own community. That's what we need to do. It doesn't have to be in the evening, it could be during the day. It could be all day. We should be contacting our high school students. They're going to inherit all of this. Ask them what are they thinking. Our seniors. We need to have that dialogue with our community to get them engaged. And as I like the notion of hearings, to having that kind of dialogue. And then if we need to, then we'll have to have a referendum. I remind myself that every time the Canadian government makes changes to immigration law or citizenship law, they don't have to have a referendum. It's like a double standard on First Nations. Oh, you guys gotta, we don't believe you, you guys gonna have to have a vote. You know how disheartening that is to have someone say that to you? So, I mean, I hope you can give that to your managers as well. You know, whether we end up in court, we might, you know, with our defiance, but I think it's time now to take over our own membership. And we decide all the categories, not 7 of them or whatever it was that Helen was talking about. We decide that and not be afraid of it. Thank you.
Lori?
Yeah, I just want to make a couple comments from carrying on from Amos. I totally, as a First Nations person here, as well as running the membership department, um, yeah, we need our own, we need our own membership. My question then is though is Section 10, First Nation, we're still under ISC, we're still under the Indian Act. And it's almost like I've been saying this for the last month. I've had so many meetings with different people at ISC, and and it's like we're unique, and we need something for us. And then I almost feel like we need to, instead of all of these amendments, because every amendment to the Indian Act membership stuff, it just keeps getting more complex and more complex. And I can already foresee the next amendment is going to be those families that are split, where one child's registered, one child's not, because of that year. So then it's almost like we need to create brand new legislation for us, by us, that's going to benefit us because it's about us. But you know, it still has to be there is the fiduciary responsibility for the funding. Because these amendments are crazy. They're absolutely crazy. And we hear it every day. We get like 100 emails a day from across Canada, some in Africa, some in Europe where people live that got status now. And it's just overwhelming within the office of what we hear and what we deal with. And but it's almost like the old saying of if it's about us, not without us. But it's creating something new, like the legislation. Like you know, everybody says they want to get rid of the Indian Act, or we all do anyway. You know, but it's those amendments are absolutely horrendous. And I just wish the federal government would see that and do something new and something different. And because, like they said earlier, we're the rights holders. We're the ones that should be, you know, talking about this. And I keep talking to headquarters people even. They know me. They're talking about me because I keep bugging them. I said, something's going to happen. Something's got to change. But I really hope that that we do keep having, like, after you guys are gone, like, there's some words that I'm going to say to my people here, but I'll wait until after. Thank you.
Brenda, do you have something? Seen your hand up a while back. You all good? Okay. Yep, go ahead.
Things. One, people are texting me and asking me why some of their comments are being deleted off of the feed. They put them on there and they're getting deleted. And yeah, so that's again something similar to, that's not freedom of speech. When you delete people, you invite them, they can come virtually or in person, and then you're deleting their comments. And I don't see that their comments are negative, but like the traditional council or Confederacy Council, they have all this stuff in place. They have like I said, they've done it through the bloodlines on how it were originally intended to be, following the bloodlines. They have all that. They're issuing membership cards, passports, that kind of stuff. So Indian Affairs is not recognizing them, but the border is recognizing them. other countries are recognizing them because they've been putting them in place and using them. And they're accepted, except in our own country. Like how you can whip out a status card and get taxes, 5% taxes off. If you want that 5%, then you apply, send all your receipts in. And again, there's a lot of lived experiences when it comes to this stuff that, like Amos and the counselors have said. People on Bloor Street in Ottawa and Quebec and stuff, they don't know. They have absolutely no idea how this is lived. They create this, they have a Eurocentric or patrilineal concept of how humans, it's total polar opposite to what our people have, which is a matrilineal society. That's what we follow. Like, I know that a few, like my family, they would be considered, they were S2s because she didn't want to put the father on. He had nothing to do with his child. So what gives him the what did I call that? Honorable mention on a birth certificate. He's following his bloodline, and yet he's only half. He's more 100% than the 8,000 or whatever people that are waiting or coming. Like, it's just totally ridiculous. It's just like, they talk about how they're trying not to be discriminatory. It's still discriminatory because they're following a patrilineal worldview. Ours has been totally raked. We've maintained it, but it's still not being recognized. Indian Affairs won't recognize it. And yet they're the title holders. They're also title holders. So you girls, I'm sorry that they sacrificed you guys, you girls, to come here. I'm sure you didn't expect these kind of comments and answers, but yeah, they don't know what they're doing. Well, they are in regards to genocide. Because I remember back in the day, my grandma talked about this, and she said, someday there's going to come a day you're not going to be able to recognize Ongwahongwe people. We're not going to look like we look. Like, both of these girls could pass according to the standards that they got now. But if we followed your bloodlines, maybe not. You can go back 6, 7, 8 generations of a bloodline to find out if you are. My kids are all 100%. I got that document before, actually no, it was after 85. It was before Roberta changed it. Roberta Jameson, she was chief then, and she changed it that we were all percentages then after that. So based on the fact that both their parents and their grandparents being Native, we have letters that say that we are 100%. That they are, I am, and then I was like shocked when I heard that my nephew was only 50%, when his mother is 100%. The father was 100%. Her parents, his parents, but because he didn't deserve no honorable mention, she didn't put him on a birth certificate. And she has a right to do that, but then her son, her child, is penalized for that. That's discriminatory. That's gender. It's discrimination based on gender. It's discrimination based on race and religion, way of life. So, like, they don't know what the heck they're doing.
Yep. Go ahead.
Just as I mean, I just want to thank everyone for their passion, and I feel it. And I mean, 6'2", it doesn't make sense. We live in a very difficult place right now, trying to figure out what to do. And this is why I like the suggestion of, continuing to meet without us here and talking about solutions and what makes sense for your nation. Just in response to the one parent on the birth certificate, this was part of S3, Bill S3 in 2017 and 2019. So there is an unknown and unstated parentage policy that the registrar can accept any evidence to establish that an unstated or unknown parent is entitled to be registered and can use that in the assessment. Because I have some registration experience, just throwing it out there that if anyone wants that kind of assistance in without even naming a parent, if statutory declarations or other kinds of evidence can be used. And I know not to, it can be difficult in understanding like the trauma that someone potentially has gone through. But there is this process now that, at least for the purposes of registration, that other evidence can be used to change someone from a 6-2 to 6-1 if they're entitled to be so.
Okay, go ahead.
Online comment. Why is Bill S3 not being inclusive to our traditional customs?
Bill S3, just for clarification, unless I think what maybe the question is about the potential, like the proposed solution for the second generation cutoff within Bill S2. And while that's one solution, and I've heard many here, and it sounds like it needs to be, I mean, from just what I've understood, that maybe there needs, your Six Nations, First Nation needs to, or has another idea of what would work better than that would incorporate, your, like what makes sense. And so that's why we will continue to embark on this consultation process and hope that you participate and tell, bring forward to our team, but also to the department, to Canada, what, how you want to see it move forward.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Yeah, with that, if Six Nations decides how they want to handle that, you're not going to go and change the law just for Six Nations, are you?
I like to think that, from what I've understood, that there should be flexibility for more than one solution. If, and if Six Nations decides that the solution that's put forward wasn't going to work for you, that's what I hope to hear from this consultation process, and then advocate for more than one solution.
So your answer is yes then. Thank you.
If I may add, so the Senate made that amendment based off the witnesses they heard. They heard from 60 witnesses, made up of different First Nations, advocates in the space, lawyers. I would invite you guys to write to the Senate if you do have a perspective. They do consider them very strongly, and I'd be happy to give you that information. We're, of course, a bit disconnected from the Senate. Senators are some are independent, and they're seeing their move as more progressive and let's fix it now and let's stop revisiting issues in the Indian Act. So that's what I understand as part of the rationale for including it. We wanted to finish the consultation process. We actually wanted to hear from all First Nations before a solution was introduced, to hear the different perspectives. We've been advocating that we haven't done that yet, and so just from the department's perspective, we do want to hear from you. I know, I'm not sure if that means much, but that's what I can attest to. And as the manager behind this work, I fully believe that we need to hear from you before any amendments are made, and that's what we're trying to push forward and do. I'd be happy to touch on some other things. I don't know if anyone has any other questions, but I know questions were asked that didn't get answered, so I'd be happy to touch on a few of those unless there's other questions.
Go ahead.
If this becomes law, when will the implementation be? What's the period or grace period? I just want to know in case we decide to have a referendum and whether we should take over our own membership, or we want to create a membership law here at Six Nations based on our residual inherent rights.
That's a great question. So Bill S2, as it was initially proposed, the only entitlement it seek to expand was for those who have been impacted by enfranchisement. So that's about 3,500 people. No, the Senate doesn't have an issue with those amendments. Those amendments will likely go forward if the House of Commons agrees with them. So from the date which the House of Commons agrees and the Senate agrees, let's say they do and the bill becomes law, they've advocated for a 12-month delay coming into force for the second generation cutoff amendment. So if that amendment goes through, they've essentially given us 12 months to continue to speak with communities and hear what they have to say. But your membership codes, you can work on that anytime it's a bit different than from the second generation cutoff. So that timeline wouldn't impact your ability to work on those codes. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Brenda.
So, I thought enfranchisement was done with. Like, how far are you going back?
So it's not a policy that we employ now. It did
Right.
end, but it's
When did it end?
in 85.
85?
But what we're trying to do is so people who were enfranchised, they didn't gain back their status. So this bill seeks to, for some of them didn't gain back their status, and so this bill seeks to reinstate those who were enfranchised and their
Since
descendants.
85. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
In some cases, they've been entitled through the different bills that have happened through 85, but if they have not been entitled since, this seeks to just give them back their entitlement.
I would like to just see our communities do it the way that we know how to do it,
Mm-hmm.
rather than all these amendments that have just really, they've blurred the lines. They've blurred the realities. So when somebody online asked about a custom government, what I was talking about, a custom traditional ways, that's it, the bloodlines. It's never been, the Indian Act was deliberately created to do that, impact our bloodlines. So we're still dealing with it 156 years later. How many generations is that? That's like maybe we're at 6 generations now. And we're still relying on somebody else to figure it out that has been messing it up ever since, or deliberately. Sir John A. Macdonald, this was his idea. And then Duncan Campbell Scott, then Pierre Trudeau, and then John, or what was his name? The other one, Harper. And then Trudeau's son. Same thing, they're still doing it. They're still trying to implement. And the reason is, and our traditional council has told the government this, that genocide is still applicable today, as long as Canada continues to benefit from their genocidal, racial, oppressive policies. They continue to benefit internationally, financially, politically, socially, from these policies that they have in place to eliminate or dilute. Because when there's no more Ngwahongwe people, who they do not have title to the land. And once we're all gone, then they do. That's why this whole process is in place, because then they don't have no treaties to honor anymore. That's the whole purpose of it. That's all it's about, is just erasing us off the face of this part of the world that we have lived on for over 10, 15,000 years. So it's ridiculous. In my mind, I'm talking about my grandparents' knowledge that they passed on to me. And I'm coming forward with it. I would be the second generation. My kids, the third. My grandchildren, the fourth. So they're being taught this, and we've had to be taught this so that we could be addressing this, bringing their voices forward. It's about power. And whoever has title to the land, undisputed title to the land. And with the people standing up and saying no more, they're showing the world that Canada doesn't have undisputed title to the land. That's why they negotiate with Indigenous communities. Pre and prior formed and consent never happens when it comes to them wanting to do something.
Councillor Thornberry.
Just a comment, I know you said something about the enfranchisement of people. They're trying to get it back. And what if those people are deceased? So what about their descendants? Where does that fall? Where does that fit?
It would expand it to their descendants as well. So as soon as that person's entitlement who did enfranchise was restored, it would apply to all their descendants as well, based on, it would act as if they never lost their entitlement.
So they would be 6-1, 6-2, or whatever, they would follow that pattern?
It would apply as if it applies to everybody else, yeah.
Okay, let's wrap it up, and thank you for coming in tonight. But I think you can see our frustration, and Six Nations speaks for ourselves. I think please tell your higher ups that this is still racist and discriminatory to get rid of us. Yeah, and please tell them to come. That's nation to nation, the higher ups, instead of, sorry again, sending you, you know. I think also too, for the meet, but also to add Six Nations to these committees or these groups or whatever you guys are developing, so we have a voice. And I think most of all, stop meeting with the Indigenous groups and meet with the right holders. Those are the ones who you need to be meeting with. So again, thank you for coming, and safe travels home.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's snowing out. Come on.